Hello, welcome to this week's A Zoom with a View. I'm Stuart Dredge, music industry writer and editor of Music Ally, and I'm here with my colleagues.
Hi, I'm Cliff Fluey. I'm a partner at Lewis Silkin and run an advisory firm called 11.
And I'm Sammy. I'm CEO and founder of Deviate Digital.
Okay, so in our last episode, we spoke to Tom Gray, founder of Broken Record Campaign and PRS board director, and to Roxanne Bastian of the Featured Artists Coalition and PPL Performer Board. And we had loads of amazing feedback. And this week we wanted to flip to kind of side B and get alternative views on the current big issues from independent labels and independent artists. So we're going to be talking today about the Broken Record Campaign, music streaming, the upcoming DCMS inquiry, and just this general idea of what streaming means for artists and labels and how it's working and how it can improve. So this week our very special guests are Paul Pacifico and Eurielle, aka Lauren Walker. So over to you to introduce yourselves. Lauren, first, tell us about yourself and what you're doing.
Hello, I'm Lauren. I'm from North Yorkshire and I'm an independent singer, songwriter and music producer. And I also have quite a significant sideline in recording for soundtracks as well.
And Paul?
Hi, so I'm Paul Pacifico. I'm the Chief Executive of the Association of Independent Music. And I've had a sort of varied career, having been a musician, signed as an artist to an independent label, worked weirdly, took a career break into banking and strategy consultancy, and then back into the music industry, where I set up and built my independent music business, continued playing. I still play to this day. And on the way, kind of also was CEO of the Featured Artists Coalition, and helped found and was the first president of the International Artist Organization. So I kind of feel like I've been on several different sides of this debate and kind of understand it from a lot of different sides.
Okay, grand. And so the cool thing this week, I think, is you've both seen things at the sharp end, right? Both as artists and as the point of view of artists and labels. So we're kind of looking forward to kind of just getting your views on what the good things are, how it's working, everything. But I think Sammy, you're going to kick off, aren't you? And we're going to have our finally home method of asking a question in turn each, which we'll probably forget halfway through.
Yeah, which definitely doesn't work every week. But yeah, no, brilliant. And Paul, I think it is quite interesting that you've been on so many sides of this fence. So I look forward to having this discussion. But broadly speaking, I want to know how streaming is working for both of you. So, Paul, in terms of independent labels, and Lauren, in terms for your career, like what is streaming doing for your career? And we start with Paul.
Okay, thanks, Sammy. Just start with a small question. I think, and I'm going to start with a big answer. I think, in the sense that I think one of the biggest challenges we face as an industry, all of us in the industry, is somehow trying to reconcile what at the moment feels like an absolute paradox. That in the big picture, the macro numbers are all very big and they're going up very quickly. But in the micro, it doesn't feel that way. It feels very painful. And I think none of us has a complete picture of what actually is going on. We're all making a lot of assumptions, and I hear a lot of assumptions being made. And it's sort of like when you read, if you ever have that feeling when you read an article in the newspaper, and if it's something you know a lot about, you always read the article and go, well, none of that's true, or only some of it's true, or partially true, and you really know. But then if you apply the same logic to every other article in the newspaper that you don't know so much about, it starts to become quite interesting. And I think we're all having a debate where we're sort of in that sense, where we know quite a lot about a small sliver of information. And I really welcome this DCMS inquiry, because I think there's finally an opportunity for everybody that understands their own article to put them together, put the jigsaw together and start to understand what's actually going on. Because I don't know that it's all about, Dr. Evil and people whisking away baskets of cash and squirreling them under the bed. I think there's more to it than that. And I think this opportunity is there for us to kind of join the dots and hopefully come to a shared understanding. Because I think what our industry is sorely lacking is a shared version of truth. We can have a debate about whether it's working well or badly. We can have an argument about whether some people should be paid more or less. But without starting with a shared version of truth, it's very difficult to build foundations that we can agree on in order to have worthwhile debates that lead to positive outcomes.
And we definitely know that not everyone agrees on anything. And I'm sure we'll get into
we all agree on one thing, Sammy. There's only one thing that everybody in the music industry agrees on, and that's that everybody else is getting more than their fair share of the pie.
That is very true. Lauren, I mean, tell us artist perspective. How is streaming working for your career?
Okay, so I'm coming at this from the point of view of an artist who makes a living primarily from streaming. Actually, the vast majority of my income comes from streaming, and I would go as far as to say that streaming has facilitated my career. So a few years ago, having gone through the usual sort of mill of record label offers and high position, high strength managers, and none of those things working out. I had to go down the independent route in the end because, like I say, none of those things came to pass. So I just ended up throwing my debut album out there, and with no budget behind it to promote it, because all the money had already gone into the production of that album. And, just said a prayer. And luckily for me, I put a bit more work into it than that, but luckily for me, the music did take organically. And since then, it's just been growing steadily and consistently, mostly thanks, I think, to the algorithms of, in particular, YouTube and Spotify, which seem to work well for me. So for me, streaming is a good thing. And I'm not quite sure really where I would be without it. And I say this as somebody who is not only an artist, but a songwriter, and I'm my own record label as well. So I kind of come at this a bit like Paul from multiple angles, and I have an understanding of the two different royalty streams, that come from streaming.
Wow, that's fantastic. And again, frankly, so refreshing to hear, Lauren. It really is. Back to Paul's point that everyone thinks everyone else is getting more, but actually people receiving and understanding what they are getting. Beyond the prayer, which I know you weren't joking about, but, would it be possible to talk about how you went about building that audience? Was it a sort of a viral thing that just the more it got out there, it had a kind of snowball effect? Or were there other elements in the digital world or other levers you were able to pull to help grow your streaming numbers and also build your audience and engage with them?
Really, for me, it was a case of making the music and putting it out there, and putting videos on YouTube. I would say probably if I had to point at one platform and say that's the origin or the original kind of driving force behind why my music took root and started to grow, I would say it was YouTube. I have had the odd, depends what you call viral, but kind of viral video on YouTube. Like I did one song when the third of the last film in the trilogy of The Hobbit came out, and I wrote and recorded a song called Song of Durian, which I put on YouTube, and it got picked up completely organically by somebody who runs the biggest Tolkien fan account on Twitter, and also somebody who runs one of the biggest Lord of the Rings fan accounts on Facebook. Totally organically. I didn't approach them. They just found it through word of mouth, and they shared it with their followers, and that sort of sent that song on YouTube on, on a path, a fairly viral path. One of my other songs from my first album called Carry Me, also it got shared on a YouTube channel called Epic Music World back in 2016, and it's now approaching 17 million views. And that song got sampled also without my permission, but that's a whole other story, by some very famous rappers called Migos as well, which also kind of helped, contributed, I guess, to the growth of my profile. And maybe the other thing, although I'm not it's hard to measure the impact that this has had on, you know, new followers finding my music. But some Dutch DJs have also sampled some of my songs with permission, I hasten to add. And they're pretty well-known DJs as well, and they perform on massive stages, or they would, you know, in normal times, pre-virus, be performing huge gigs all over the world. So they have probably also contributed to new people discovering my music. But really, for me, it's just been a case of making the music, making videos, and putting it out there. And on YouTube, like say, and Spotify in particular, those algorithms there seem to like me. On other platforms, not so much, like Pandora in the US, Amazon, Apple Music. You know, I get a fraction of the action on my music on those platforms that I get on YouTube and Spotify. So something about their algorithms that like me more than on those other platforms. But yeah, it's a combination of a few things, really, I think.
There's just, I mean, incredible. Never underestimate the Lord of the Rings fan base, I think. Also, I have a client that did a song for the film, and I know the power of that fan base. But I think you mentioned it right at the start here, saying that you think perhaps streaming is the majority of your income. Is that right? Are you earning more from streaming, or does it? How's that? If without prying, you can tell me to go away if you like. What does that pie look like for you in terms of what you make from different areas?
I haven't actually crunched the numbers and calculated exactly what percentage of my income, pardon me, comes from streaming as opposed to other sources. But if I had to hazard a guess off the top of my head, I would say probably 95% of my income comes from streaming. And put it this way, as a child, I think I had a pretty idyllic childhood. I grew up in a beautiful place in the countryside, and I had a really amazing education, and you know, by all accounts, a really nice lifestyle. And I looked at what my dad was earning. My dad was a dentist, and he was earning about £80,000 a year. And I thought, well, if that's what you need to be earning to provide that kind of lifestyle for a family, and I've got 3 older brothers, so it's quite a big family, you know, then that's what I would like to achieve for myself. Not taking inflation into account, but, you know, a few years ago, I got to that mark, and then I surpassed it, and my income has been and continues to grow steadily and consistently. So it is, I would say I'm probably part of a middle class group of musicians who are able to make a living from streaming, and not just barely scraping by, but, you know, making a pretty decent living by most people's standards.
Okay, that's cool. I mean, I guess, Paul, you've got a vantage point sort of above the artist level, looking at independent labels. I mean, it's really interesting hearing Lauren talk about building a career, building an audience, being able to cut through, because streaming is so noisy. I think there's that, I can't remember what the stat is now about how many tracks are uploaded every day, but it's kind of frightening. Are you seeing this is the environment where independent artists, including those signed to labels, can kind of build and grow and cut through this noise? Because I think certainly, and I'm probably guilty of this, we write a lot about the people at the very top of the pyramid, about how many streams they're getting and how many audience, but lower down, is this an environment where you can survive rather than just think, I suppose?
Yeah, I think not just survive but thrive, and that's to say, look, this isn't a sort of an opportunity for me to say, well, anyone that wants to have a go in music is going to be, you know, hugely successful and make tons of money. That's not reality. But that said, I think looking through the lens of the entire AIM membership, covering both artists signed to independent labels and, you know, artists who release their own music as their own label. Anecdotally, and we're gathering data on this to try and submit to the DCMS inquiry, we hear more evidence that supports the idea that there are more middle-income artists now than I think there have probably ever been in the music industry. We also sense that despite problems that exist in the market, we probably have the most democratic and most meritocratic music market that we've ever had. So again, like I say, there are lots of positives to look at, and we've got this weird sort of paradox that we're fighting with, that's sort of, you know, the big numbers and yet the micro experience. One thing I'd say is that most of the members of the AIM community have been through a process over decades of, I think, realizing independent labels aren't going to compete with major labels on price. You know, they're not going to outspend a major label in terms of signing an artist or delivering advertising spend. So where do our strengths lie? Our strengths lie in the relationship with the artist, in the relationship with the specialist community, in genre, knowledge, and specificity and expertise, in being able to go faster, in able, you know, be more nimble, all the usual kind of things people say about entrepreneurs and small businesses. And I think the independent community made some really important foundational moves through the growth of streaming that have enabled small players to be able to get ahead. And the two I would point to really are, first of all, the formation of Merlin, which is the third-party licensing hub through which independents aggregate their negotiations with streaming platforms. That means that no matter how small you are, if you're, Lauren, I'm not sure who your distributor is, but if you're self-releasing through an independent distributor and that distributor is a Merlin member, you're accessing the same rates that any of the biggest players in the market are, you know, and you're not suffering from a lack of scale in terms of what deal you're accessing. But the other thing that I think, you know, that's sort of one part of it, that's the sort of yin, if you like. The yang to that yin was the creation of the Fair Digital Deals Declaration in 2014. And that was orchestrated by the Worldwide Independent Network, the global umbrella that AIM is part of. And I actually, funnily enough, I contributed quite a lot to that declaration whilst I was CEO of the Featured Artists Coalition. I remember being in, they weren't smoke-filled rooms, but it felt, you know, that sort of atmosphere of, you know, intense discussion and debate about how far the labels would go and what they could where we could get to. And actually, there were commitments made there that, yeah, in terms of sharing non-attributable revenues, or which are often referred to as black box revenues with artists, making sure that, yeah, the big issue of the day was what was going to happen with the sale of Spotify equity that the labels had got in those early deals. And the independents stood up and made commitments unilaterally to ignore actually what old world contracts said, and to actually play fair and say, look, this is a time where we have to be working in partnership. The future success of the music ecosystem is in doing partnerships and building sustainable careers for the long term. It's one of the things Lauren said that I really that really resonated with me is about sustained and consistent growth over time, and sort of you come into a place of predictable growth. That's something that the master rights side, the record company side of our industry never had. Publishing businesses could always find investment because they were more like property companies. It was smaller revenues, lower risk, and predictable revenues over the long term. Streaming has opened up the possibility of record labels to work like that. That for me is extremely exciting. And that has, so you've got Merlin, the Fair Digital Deals Declaration, incremental, predictable growth. All of these things, for me, create a platform for an SME community of entrepreneurs that can really go places. And that's true for the big players in the independent community like Beggars and Domino and Pias. It's also equally true for the AJ Tracys, Georgia Smith, and, you know, Lauren Walker.
Paul, I just want to come on. You've been very eloquent and emollient. So it's time to, you know, get the boxing gloves on. And let's talk about the tale as old as time, not Blur versus Oasis, but the sort of indies versus majors argument, as it were. And, you know, there was a view that in the world of digital, where you didn't have gatekeepers that were as, how should we say, vertically integrated, I believe is the euphemism, as radio and record stores, as it were, or in the, you know, sort of in the download era, it's felt that there was a very, very sort of narrow gap for indies to go through. Do you think that even in a world of Merlin, giving you that negotiating power, it's a fair fight and that it's brought, for smaller genre or for people that aren't sort of necessarily, sort of top 40 or anything like that, is the playing field leveling off?
That's a really good question, as I would expect from you, Cliff. Is it a fair fight? Do you know what? It's a commercial market populated by some really strong characters, some really bright people, and people who have started and built their careers based on passion rather necessarily than doing an MBA and thinking about what's going to make them the most money when they leave. And I think what we get to is anecdotally, and I'm in a very careful position with AIM. I'm not allowed to see the deals, nor should I be. There are serious, competition issues around what I know and what I don't know. So I'm very careful in the conversations that I have. But the impression I always get is people who do see the big picture sit back and will often reflect on the fact that that last negotiation with platform A or that last encounter with service B was fierce and hard fought, and that great, very strong arguments were brought to bear on all sides, but that actually a good deal was reached. Now, I think if you go back 20 years or 15 years, there were no norms around some of these digital deals, and they were lurching all over the place. There's a lot of volatility in expectations. I think as the streaming market has normalized and become more mainstream, there are frameworks. There is an idea, a sense of what's fair, what's right, what's about where balance lies. And I think, we will always fight, and we should always fight for our voice to be heard, our interests to be supported. And particularly, I would say, and I say this from a professional perspective, but also a personal one, that I think, independent voices must be heard. I think, the future health of the music industry is better served by giving space to new voices. Otherwise, we wither on the vine. How do we bring up that next generation of game changers? Disruptors keep us healthy. And we as an industry and our platform partners and our artist partners and everybody, I think, enjoys and encourages that disruptive voice. But first of all, because that's part of why we're in music, but also from a purely commercial standpoint, without it, we become rapidly irrelevant. So the long answer to your question is that. The short answer is, we fight hard. We fight our corner because nobody owes us a living. And we've got to make ourselves heard. We've got to make ourselves relevant, and we've got to make sure we count.
So it's a market, basically.
I think it is. It's a market. It's a market that's more complicated than ever before, and it's a market with more choice than ever before. So first of all, you've got more choice, means choice anxiety, and you've got to understand your choices. And AIM has a big role to play in terms of helping people understand what decisions they're making. I think that the complexity of the market means that whilst more people can succeed, more people need more access to threshold knowledge. And I think we've got, a lot of work to do there. And it's funny that, you referenced the sort of the Beauty and the Beast track, Tale as Old as Time. A lot of these things feel like they're the same old arguments in a new frame. And part of my concern is that some of the solutions being proposed are old world solutions. And what we're not doing is saying, what is the problem? How do we work together to solve some of the industry's problem? And how do we actually think about what forward-facing solutions might look like, rather than trying to bolt old world ideas onto new world technologies? And in fact, I think about that with a lot of the debates that are going on, but also funny you should mention that track, because the last commercial session that I did as a session musician on a track last year that was literally came out in the last month or so was I played on the Royal Philharmonic's version of Tale as Old as Time. It's just come out literally in the last couple of weeks. That's me playing on it. How weird is that? And I did that as a professional session. And it really refreshed my thinking on what it is to be a session musician the perspective of session musicians. I know that's a hot part of this debate. It's an important part of this debate. They're a massively important part of our ecosystem. But again, I feel that, much alongside some of the other arguments that, Tom Gray talks about so eloquently in Broken Record, I feel, we need to come together, take a step back from the heat, have a think about the ecosystem, the economics, the broad sector dynamics, but the detailed experience of individuals within it, different perspectives on who's investing where does their return come from, if you're investing in writing songs, or you're investing in building a studio, or investing in making a master recording and marketing it. What does that look like? Where's that money going? How are we tracking it? We need to work together on this and build, I think, forward-facing systems that are going to work for the new world.
That makes me very happy to hear you say that, Paul, because that's definitely, if anyone's looked at my Twitter in the last, 10 years, that's sort of the takeaway for me is, but especially now that we do need some clarity on what is achievable and what does the future look like. So I agree with you that some things here that are about to be played out are part of the old world, and actually we should be going, what's the new world? Let's just, how do you put that to one side? But it also, we know there's many public cases of independent labels doing incredibly well, actually, and I think Merlin, without a shadow of a doubt, has played an important part in that. But also, even the last week, there's been a number. There's a big article in the New York Times today on independent artists that are in college making an absolute fortune from streaming, and several over the past few days. I'm sure we'll see a lot more going through the next few weeks. But Lauren, I wanted to ask you, as an independent artist, what's your engagement with those services been like? So obviously we talk about Merlin, who go and do licensing if your distributor or label is a member, or increasingly AIM, whether they're massive independent labels, or if you're an artist who has your own label, that actually still you would absolutely be a part of AIM, because that's what they're all about, and that entrepreneurial thing. But what does that look like for you in terms of actual engagement with the services? Have they helped you? Have they hindered you? Do you have a direct relationship with anyone at Spotify or YouTube, or is that handled by your label?
With all platforms, even the ones that I'm doing better on, like YouTube and Spotify, there's always a middleman for me. So with YouTube, I can't really correspond directly with anybody there most of the time, unless it's like a technical problem that needs solving.
We've all been on the help pages.
yeah, and even that, to be honest, mostly goes through a company called Leica Network, which they're the company who are responsible for monetizing my masters on that platform. And Spotify as well. No, I don't have a personal contact there. I wish I did, but no, I don't. Like all other artists, my only way to sort of interact with them, apart from tweeting them on social media, is via the artist portal, and you can submit your music for playlist consideration there, and it does work. Because one of the songs from my last album, Goodbye Butterfly, was picked for the classical new releases playlist, which has a pretty big following. So it does work. But yeah, there's a bit of a way to go in terms of artists being able to engage with those platforms. And when I say artists, I mean specifically independent artists like myself. I think what's your relationship?
So sorry, just on that, because I think this is quite important. What's your relationship like with your distributor? Who do you distribute to?
So I've tried several. I've used CD Baby, Sounddrop, Symphonic, DistroKid, Lander. Ditto.
You have really tried them.
Yeah, I've been around a bit in the distributor sense. Some are better than others. Some claim to sort of have relationships with playlist curators and everything. I certainly haven't personally benefited from any of those additional extras that they say they offer yet. Although actually it's something that I need to find time to do a bit more of, because supposedly CD Baby, for example, will if something's taking off organically, then they say they'll throw their weight behind it and try and give it an extra push. I'm not quite sure exactly how they mean.
They do all say that though.
Yeah.
And also not just indies, majors have their own versions, whether it's Spin Up or something else. That everyone's watching that data for anything that peaks, and actually any distributor or label worth its weight would be jumping on something on its platform. That goes. I just find it interesting when we talk about independent artists, especially if you're fully independent and you're using a distributor and licensing, or you have your own label, what that relationship looks like, I guess.
Well, wherever you look, there's always a middleman. And as I was saying a moment ago, or I was about to say, apart from Spotify and YouTube, other platforms have, in my experience anyway, further to go in terms of allowing artists, independent artists especially, to be able to engage with them. Like Amazon has only quite recently launched a portal for artists to be able to look at their analytics, for example. Apple Music was behind Spotify as well in providing access to analytics. Yeah. There is, with Apple Music, as far as I know, no way to pitch for playlist consideration whatsoever for an independent artist anyway on their platform. With Amazon Music, they make that pitching service very difficult to find. They don't exactly surface it and make it obvious to artists to be able to find like Spotify does. So yeah, there is a slight issue there with transparency. There's still as there has always been, it used to be the major labels and people at producers at radio stations who kind of held all the power and curated what people got to hear. Less so, obviously, now we have, thanks to streaming, among other things, come a long way. And some of those barriers have been lowered as to what people hear, but there's still a little way to go. I think room for improvement.
Okay, well, grand. I mean, the other thing we want to talk about today, we're kind of following on from all this, was a recent interview I did that we seem to bring up every week at the moment in this podcast, when I talked to Daniel Ek at Spotify.
Stuart broke the internet.
I didn't break the internet, just artists getting really cross that Daniel Ek broke the internet. But it was this interview where he talked about artists can't release music every few years like they used to, and need to work hard and have a continuous engagement with fans. And I think some people got really cross at the implication they weren't working hard if they weren't doing well from streaming. Other people got cross because they thought he was disrespecting the idea of you take time to make music and craft music. Like, people had different reasons for getting angry, but there was a lot of it. But other people kind of shrugged and said, well, that's kind of how streaming works. You kind of release regularly and often rather than once a few years, and be constantly doing stuff and releasing things. And this is just the dynamics of this world we're in now. So I kind of wanted to pick both your brains on how you see the nature of streaming in terms of the demand it puts upon an artist to be constantly releasing, constantly available, constantly engaging, and whether that's just a fact of life and we get on with it, or whether it is something that is worth discussing in terms of, well, I don't know, the demands, I suppose, it places on musicians. That's a long rambling question, but hopefully it makes sense what I'm asking.
Shall I go first?
I thought we silenced there for a minute. Everyone just looked at me. Yeah. So I mean, how do you feel about how do you feel in terms of you're creating music within this environment? Like, how is it? Yeah. How do you feel about it?
Yeah. No, I do have something to say about this, and that's that. So I released an album, my debut album, back in 2015. And then after that, I collaborated with the same person that I co-wrote my debut album with. And I did several singles with him. And I think there are about 9 in total, and they were released kind of one after the other. I can't remember if I did it deliberately or not, but whether I was or I wasn't, effectively playing the game that the streaming platforms want you to play, which is release constantly, a constant stream of music. And after the 9th song, I thought to myself, I've completely lost the will to write and record another song, because what a lot of people don't realize, you know, from the consumer side of things, is that it's not just a case of writing and recording a song and releasing it. You know, if only it were that simple, that would be lovely. But with every song that you write and record comes a huge, great big admin trail of jobs that you have to do to register it, to promote it. I have a list of points for every single release that I do. That's about, I think it's got like 25 things in it, and some of which are more involved and time consuming than others. And you end up feeling like you're a hamster on one of those little kind of exercise wheels, just constantly going round and round and round and round and round. And in the end, you feel fried, and you just lose the will to create anything, because you know that every time you do, you've got all this stuff that, you know, most artists don't like doing, myself included, but I have to do it because that's part of being an independent artist. You know, comes after that, and it puts you off after a while, and you get burnt out. And there's been quite a few high-profile creators who have publicly burnt out, and they just drop off social media for several months or so, and then they pop up later and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I've been away for a while, but you know, I just got burnt out, basically." And unfortunately, if there's one downside to streaming that I don't like, it's that they have calibrated their platforms to suit artists and creators who constantly just churn out content without a break. You know, their algorithms reward creators who do that. And it creates a sort of keeping up with the Joneses problem, whereby, you know, if you're an artist like me who in the end goes, "Nah, stop, I've had enough of this. I'm not playing this game because I cannot cope with it. It's bad for my mental health. I have no life." Then, you know, if you do that, you make that decision to stop and go, "No, I'm going to do things my way." And I decided to go back to the album format after that, for the most part. I have to deal with the anxiety, because I'm very competitive, of seeing other artists who are competing for the same kind of audience as me, who are playing the game, who are just constantly churning out material. And, you know, you see them getting lots of streams, lots of followers, lots of subscribers. And, you know, it makes someone like me think, "Oh, you know, they're starting to catch up with me, and I don't really like that." So it's not really a healthy kind of state of affairs, really, I think, that they've created. And the same goes for social media too. They do exactly the same. The focus is not at all on quality, as I wish it was. Instead, it's about quantity. Just keep churning stuff out, keep posting. I was on a webinar earlier this year with, it was like how to make the best of Instagram and Facebook. And there were executives from both of those platforms on that webinar. And one of them said, to make the most of Instagram, I recommend that you do 1 standard post per day and no less than 5 stories posts per day. And I was just like, it made my blood boil. And I wasn't the only other person who was irritated by that on that webinar, because somebody did say something like, don't you think that's a little bit unhealthy, you know, to basically get people just glued permanently to social media? And, you know, obviously the focus here in this conversation is on streaming platforms, and like I say, they're doing exactly the same thing.
The two are melding slightly, though. I mean, there's licensing deals with Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, so I think we can absolutely talk about the two things in the same breath, actually.
As you said, actually, like there was this point, I think, mentioned creators, like there's a point when all the YouTubers started hitting a wall, didn't they? I think, and over about 2 years ago, where they all started going, "I've got nothing left. I've vlogged every day for 5 years," and people, like, some of them self-destructed in bad ways. Some of them just, like you said, burnt out and stopped doing it. Like, Paul, I guess you could see it from an artist point of view, but also for labels, this puts a lot of pressure on, for example, the marketing teams to be. So, do you see a positive side? Like, is this just something we learn to kind of go with, or what do you?
So far, we all, including whether you're talking from a professional perspective or as a consumer, we have all gone along with this. We have all, you know, bought into this concept of the attention economy, whether willingly or unwillingly, or knowingly or unknowingly, and music is vying for attention alongside, you know, whatever Kim Kardashian was or wasn't wearing yesterday.
Yeah.
And there's no, you know, that all of everything is equal. So, and I kind of come at this thinking, you know, everything Lauren has just said is absolutely right. And I think about, look at not just in music, look at football. If you wanted to be a professional footballer 20, 30 years ago, you played football, did your game, you know, and that was it. If you want to be a professional footballer today, you have to be an expert in brand management deals, in image rights, in all sorts of things. You're always on. And this always on culture isn't unique to music, but music has become part of the always on culture. Yeah. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. I teach a course at Berkeley in Valencia on the artist as a startup, and it's sort of reframing artist concepts of themselves and their careers through the lens of a kind of startup, but hopefully in a healthy way, not kind of they've got to be Silicon Valley style. But I try and talk about this as coming down to a very simple triangular relationship between three concepts. I talk to them a lot about the fact that streaming is not the only game in town. It is one of the biggest games in town, but it's not the only game in town. And that streaming doesn't suit everybody. And it was funny, Sammy asked Lauren about her revenue mix near the beginning of this conversation. What's the pie chart of revenue? Because, of course, artists earn revenue through lots of different revenue streams, and different artists have a different mix. Some will be totally earning money from live, and almost nothing from streaming or record sales, and at the moment hurting all the more because of the shutdown of live. Other artists will have a great line of merch and not sell many records, but sell tons of merch because their merch is connecting with people in a certain way. So I talk about the fact that, take a step back, streaming is not the only game in town, and your artist revenue mix should be your own. You own your own revenue mix and you drive your own revenue mix. And that comes down to who you are. So the triangular relationship is three very simple concepts that I've kind of tried to distill it down to are vision, identity, and community. And I think that the number at the moment is about 100,000 tracks a week going up on Spotify alone, let alone everything else, let alone SoundCloud and all the others. The barrier in our industry is no longer getting music to market, it's getting your music heard, it's cutting through the noise. And I always make the case that now more than ever, having absolute clarity on your creative vision is an essential first step to trying to cut through the noise. If your vision isn't crystal clear on who you are, what you stand for, what you're about, what the fundamental concept of your creative voice as an artist, if that isn't clear to you, much less likely you're going to cut through the noise. And actually, unless you're really saying something you want to say, there's so much noise out there. There are so many look-alikes, sound-alikes. You know, unless you can really be you and that you is distinctive, you're very unlikely to succeed in a very crowded marketplace these days. So you've got your vision. Your identity as an artist is the lens through which you communicate that vision. Your identity is how you express, how you communicate who you are, how you manifest that vision into the world. And that's so important, that your identity genuinely reflects your vision, and that your identity is an authentic reflection of what you're trying to say. And then obviously your community. The whole point is about connecting with a community, finding a community that responds to your vision through your identity, and that engages with you on that basis. And I think that the wealth of choice and opportunity in how you deliver that, how you manage the relationship of that triangle, if you can handle that positively, create a sort of virtuous circle between those elements, I think it's all to play for. And I think it's so important for artists to be able to be brave, to have a team around them that support them in these very, very difficult decisions. Because Lauren, you just talked about, this fear, this FOMO, the fear of missing out. You see other people doing stuff all the time. Is the bravery it takes to make these decisions consciously and say, I'm going to do this my way. And I think that's, for me, the 21st century independent spirit is doing it your way. It's not necessarily having to do everything yourself. It's building the right team to support you. It's about building sustainable careers.
Paul, that is where I think even in independent and artists and label world distinguishing themselves. As someone that owns a digital marketing agency, we work with major labels, independent artists, managers directly, publishers, promoters. We cover off the whole landscape. So I get a pretty broad vision of how this works, depending what deal you're in. And actually, the point that you said about trying to establish who you are, I mean, that's how we start every meeting, especially with a new artist, but also actually legacy acts going, what do you want to say? You've got 30 years of work. How do you want to put this out in the modern age? But also for new artists to go, who are you? Who are you, and what do you want to be? What do you want to say? How do you want to sound? And what do you want to do? But
one thing quickly, when I was at the FAC, the question I was asked the most actually was, how do I know if I'm an artist? And I came to an answer which I kind of stuck with and felt comfortable with, and it was just very simply, you've got something to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which I think again in obviously we're across all platforms, both streaming and social, and have to have campaigns for each of them, specific strategies for each of them. And I think when Lauren talks about when it's burnout, imagine running an agency that does this for other people. And that still requires the artist input, because they have to sign off on everything we put out. And I feel like we're diverging slightly from the topic. Can we talk about Spotify's new discovery mode? So this week or last week, Spotify have announced that they are trialing something in the US, I think originally, with certain label partners, a small group of label partners and artists, where they can place a track in, is it Radio Stu? You wrote about this, you know more than me.
So you can tell Spotify this track or these tracks that can be multiple, I want them to be bumped up in the recommendation album. These are the ones I want to promote. And I want them to be more likely to appear it's the radio feature when you choose a radio station on Spotify. And it's also the autoplay features when you reach the end of an album or a playlist. If you've got that switched on, it just carries on playing your music. So it's only in those two places. It's not in Discover Weekly. It's not in playlists and anywhere else. It's those two at the moment, but possibly more. And so that is, but in return for that, you accept a promotional royalty rate, which hasn't been quantified publicly yet, but it's lower. So yes, that was the gist.
That was extremely accurate, actually, and I think
that's exactly why I asked you to say. I know how many times he's had to write about this in the last couple of weeks.
I'd say the first thing is, so much of what we talk about has so much nuance that's lost in the press, let alone in the debates we have in the pub. Not that we're having debates in the pub these days. Zoom drinks is the best we get. And our industry, I keep coming back to what I said at the beginning. We need to take a step back and have proper conversations. I think the timing of the announcement is really unfortunate, and I don't think that's a conspiracy. I think it's cock up over conspiracy. Am I allowed to say cock up on a podcast?
It's one of those two. It's either, I'm going to go out and say this, it's either complete cock up or complete conspiracy. Who puts that out 2 weeks before a parliamentary inquiry? Odd, isn't it?
I think a company, I think it's a function of a company who've got a head office answering to shareholders in New York. A parliamentary inquiry happening in the UK that is on the public affairs department's radar screen, but not the commercial or shareholder activist radar screen. And you've got, I think left-hand, right-hand stuff going on. I think it's unfortunate for the team in the UK that are going to have to respond to the inquiry.
Who have had to respond to the inquiry. I've been on a number of calls this week.
I'm sure they will respond, and I think it's.
Oh, just give it a bit of balance though. And again, I really want to hear what Lauren feels about this, as mentioned the algorithm. But back in the day, labels would pay retailers for positioning, and there is a world where they've said, look, we're not asking people to pony up, which is what people have asked us to do in the past. We're essentially sort of cash flowing that and, making it sort of success related. And if it doesn't work for you, you won't do it anymore. So, beyond the shock and awe of it,
I think those are all the things we're going to find out. I mean, and I think it's a debate to be had. I don't think I would take an in principle decision without figuring out actually how this is going to game out. I mean, we don't know yet what the discount is. How much of a hit are these labels and artists being asked to take, and how much more full royalty play will it lead to if they put a bit of bread on the water with the cheaper stuff? I don't know. Spotify's pitch, I imagine, will be something like, well, radio and autoplay are a fraction of the plays you get on the platform, but if it nudges you into a bit more discovery, you'll get full royalty plays off the back of it, so it's worth doing. Now, Cliff, you're right to point out that many commercial marketplaces work in this way, and this sort of discounting on some areas in order to benefit in others. I understand all of that. I think though this is, at a moment of hypersensitivity in the discussions about streaming, I think it's at best ill-timed, and at worst a cause for much anxiety, certainly in the independent community, where I think it's such an important point of principle that everybody's music has the same value. And this is something to touch on actually, because of also these discussions about user-centric. To me, it's very important that everybody's music has the same value in streaming, and it's egalitarian in that sense. And I think the minute we stray away from that, the minute we stray away from editorial clarity and equality of value, I think we're in a very much more difficult place.
But then where do you stand on equitable remuneration? Because what really shook me about them announcing this, and I'm sure every other board and every other company everywhere going, hang on, are you saying there's a different rate for one play versus another? Is that what you're saying? And it appears that they are. Like, how does that feed into the equitable remuneration argument?
Well, I don't think it does directly. I mean, you could talk, you've got the kind of, here we're talking about, would you accept a discount on your rate in order to get a bit more promotion? That's one conversation. That's a kind of commercial conversation about how the market works. The equitable remuneration debate is really interesting, because I think what we've got a problem and a solution that are being proposed that aren't necessarily linked.
Yeah.
And the problem, I think, is a sense that session musicians haven't benefited from the huge growth of revenue to the music industry from streaming. The solution is to impose a sort of old world radio linear broadcast solution onto a new world on demand streaming world. And I don't know that particularly works. And also, to add to that, I think that's an important but difficult conversation to have when you zoom out from the UK and you look at it from a European or even a global standpoint. I'd say in terms of the debate itself, I personally have huge sympathy with some of the arguments being put forward by session musicians, where they are feeling like they're on the outside of this growing music economy. I think that that's a valid discussion and debate to have. I personally, having looked at the economics of it and the costs of implementing the system and where that would take us, don't necessarily believe that equitable remuneration is a new world answer to a new world problem. I think it's actually a rehash of what we had in the old world. That might be a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Actually, we could, I think, come up with ideas that are much more forward-facing, much more elegant than.
Tell me what they are, Paul.
Oh,
Tell
fantastic.
me, give me. No, in fact, I would like to, if we can, have that question, because there's obviously been fixed streaming and broken record, both huge campaigns. Obviously, we don't agree with. No one on this call necessarily agrees with all the arguments. I would like to hear from both of you on what you think will fix streaming, if anything. If it, well, reword it how you like. But for you personally, what are the things that we need to do in order to take the industry forward? I would love to hear that from both of you. Lauren, would you like to start?
Sure. Okay. Obviously, as somebody for whom streaming has been a very good thing, and who's able to make a living from it, I don't really see streaming as something that's broken. If anything, actually, I'm quite happy with how it's working overall. Do I think it's perfect? No, of course. There's always room for improvement.
What's that improvement? What is that improvement?
I think probably the thing that concerns me the most is the fact that per stream royalty rates have been declining on, I think, most or all platforms year on year now since streaming really took off. And, ultimately, that's not sustainable, because if people like me are putting in huge budgets into recording things and promoting them, my last album I spent over 100,000 on, and the per stream royalty rate just keeps going down and down and down and down forever. Of course, at some point, people like me are going to start asking themselves the question, well, is it worth the investment? Am I getting the return to justify that investment? So something about that that declining rate needs to be done. Perhaps a minimum rate, per stream royalty rate that rights holders get paid, and it can't go below that amount. I don't know if that's a workable, viable solution from the point of view of the DSPs, but that would be something that I would point at and identify as a problem, and that it needs addressing one way or another.
Lauren, sorry, don't mean to interrupt, but and it sort of feeds into the last question, really, which is, how do you feel in that sort of, in a world where you're trying to get more exposure, how do you feel about that sort of balance on that point? I'd love to know.
Sorry, what balance?
So on the discovery mode, if there were, it doesn't necessarily work that way, but that I'd accept a lower rate in order to get more exposure, theoretically.
Yeah. I don't like to judge anything or really take a strong position on anything unless I've tried it first. So I'm looking at this with an open mind that I might give it a try, because you can switch it off at any point if you don't like it or if it's not working for you. So I'm going to give it a try. I'm curious to see exactly what the reduced royalty rate is. And I mean, put it this way, I was reading an article recently, that guy, Ari Herstand, I think is his name, something like that. He does that Ari's Take blog thing. He was speaking to CD Baby recently about there'd been a bit of a fiasco whereby for a year CD Baby was not paying the artists the royalty rate that Spotify itself was reporting to them that they should be getting paid for each of their streams. And they got pulled up on this by Ari and asked why. And eventually he was told, by CD Baby, we switched our model from the 800 or so different rates that apparently Spotify will pay per stream to a different model with a smaller number of rates that they had to select from in order to pay their artists. And what that meant in real terms was, if you are somebody like me who gets lots of streams in the US, you were getting paid a lower royalty rate than what Spotify was actually reporting and paying to CD Baby, which is bad news. But if you were getting a lot of streams in India, you were getting paid more for those streams than Spotify was saying, you know, they should be paying. So it's extremely complicated when it comes to the rates that they're actually paying. And like I say, I'm waiting to see what exactly this reduced royalty rate is for this discovery mode thing before I judge it, and also to see how effective it is. If it's too low, you know, I think I would maybe feel a bit aggrieved if I picked one of my songs for that discovery mode and it's you know, took off and started getting loads of streams, but the per stream royalty rate was, you know, fractions of what I would normally get paid for those streams. I might feel a little bit miffed, but I'd still be torn, because I'd be like, oh, well, more people are discovering my music and I'm not paying, you know, up front for that. So yay, that's good. But I would also be a little bit like, it's slightly sort of taking advantage of the rights holders as well, particularly those, you know, who don't have upfront budgets to promote their music up front, and so they're more likely to take advantage of a tool like this.
And Paul, what would you say needs fixing in streaming?
Yeah, I think different things for different people is always the answer, because it's such a multifaceted problem, or multifaceted beast. I think it's very interesting to hear from Lauren that, you know, we can't necessarily start with the assumption that streaming needs fixing. You know, there are winners and losers in every market. I think from an independent music standpoint, certainly from an AIM standpoint, a lot of the things being called for in campaigns like Broken Record have largely been addressed. So the sharing of black box revenues, the reconciliation of legacy deals, the addressing of old world royalty rates, you know, bad label deals. Those are problems of the past anyway. You know, should pressure be applied on people that haven't quite come to the table on that yet? Sure. You know, are there real world examples of artists being treated very badly? If there are, they'll come to light. And I think, you know, we need to be an industry that plays fair and that is collegiate. So in that sense, it feels to me like Broken Record is something that isn't in a lot of the things that it's calling for as much of a kind of an immediate problem to fix in the independent community that it might be elsewhere in the sector. Some of the other calls are for a shift to the balance of payments between, say, publishers and labels, and the songwriter side of streaming. And much as I talked earlier about the sort of macro big numbers, micro small numbers, something I struggle with, and I'm sure we'll learn more in the Select Committee inquiry, is how at the sort of macro level, you know, if money going to the publishing side has gone up from sort of 8.5% odd, Stuart, you're going to pick me up on this, to about 15% in the streaming era. And we see in reports like UK Music's Music by Numbers, the publishers reporting increasing revenues year on year on year. How is it the songwriters are worse off? And I'm not sure I know the answer to that. Now, I'm not going to make assumptions about it, because it's not really where my expertise lies. I'm not having those day-to-day conversations with songwriters, with publishers. Now, is it that we're only hearing from people that aren't earning as much as they'd like to earn, or feel they're not earning as much as they should be earning? Or is it that there's a genuine problem? Is it the problem that there's a concentration of wealth between fewer songwriters who happen to be writing the hits at the moment? Or is it genuinely that there's a disconnect in that market that's preventing that money flowing through to the right people? Now, I don't know, and I'm not going to make assumptions, but I really look forward to having some clarity. And that's, for example, that's when my analogy earlier of reading a newspaper article, that's an article I don't know so much about. So I'm looking forward to having experts inform me on what we're hearing, what's accurate, what's not, where the problems lie there. There may be some things to fix, there may not. I certainly have the view that there are, powerful voices, strong opinions, and very, very, there's big data on both sides of that argument. And the commercial negotiation between rights holders on both sides, the sort of publishing side and the master rights side, will fight fiercely for their interests. And the fact that that balance sits at about 15% probably reflects the data that underpins those arguments. And I think if we look in detail at, how much people are actually earning from the deals, what capital they're putting at risk, what the returns are, we'll if we had access to that kind of information, it would probably help us have a better quality conversation about whether 15% is about right. So I know one of the things that we're doing at AIM is asking those questions. So we've gone out to members and said, look, no one likes talking about money. It's all a bit embarrassing, but let's do it. Tell us what you're earning. Tell us what your margins are. Tell us what it looks like. And we'll see if we can aggregate some sensible data, anonymize it so that you're not breaching your confidentiality rules with your artists and you're not, putting yourself in an uncomfortable position. But, well, I think we should put ourselves in an uncomfortable position, actually, having said that. We're going to aggregate that data and we're going to put it forward, because I think actually the more information that's out there, the better the conversation we can have, and we can figure out where problems exist, what actually are they, and what do good solutions look like. Coming back to your actual, coming back to the point on ARPU, so average revenue per user, is that what it is? And the decline of ARPU as streaming grows. I'd like to see government do much more on two fronts. I'd like them to do much more on anti-piracy. And I think that will give streaming platforms much more confidence to look at their pricing a bit more aggressively. Spotify hasn't upped its $9.99 a month since it launched. That was how many years ago now? I think there are some serious considerations about, is the problem in our market the fact that we don't have a strong enough commercial market, that we need a bit of support to actually, stop that choice between, well, I could pay or I could just pirate. That's still out there.
Isn't there an issue that that the exactly the same functionalities on all the services? So it's very, very difficult for them to innovate and compete.
I would love
for the rights holders.
I would actually not. I wouldn't apply that to the independents. I think the discussions that we have are all about the fact that we would love to see innovation in platforms. We'd love to see genre-specific platforms that respond to the specific needs and requirements of particular communities.
Yeah.
I would love to see platforms that respond to every aspect of how anybody wants to interface with music. There should be something there for them, and I think that would be lovely. The other area I think the UK has an opportunity in is copyright. We know we're not getting the EU copyright directive. I think we're under great threat in the US trade deal. The negotiators so far have been very aggressive in looking to expand the sorts of safe harbor provisions that have caused so much damage in the past and so much uncertainty and lack of clarity. I think, one of the things I think, for better or worse, the UK is a global centre for libel tourism because our laws lean a certain way. Well, wouldn't it be wonderful for the UK to take the opportunity to make the UK the global centre of tourism for investing in and making music? Why not? We've got that opportunity. Ours is a content-driven economy in music, not a platform economy. Historically, UK hasn't built the platforms, but my goodness, we've made some of the best music and the top reasons for people to go to those platforms. So, that would be my recommendation. And then I think finally, Sammy, not to miss out on the opportunity to answer your question on equitable remuneration. I think there's a really important conversation to have about how session musicians are remunerated, about, what is the life of a session musician? What is their experience? How is it to walk in their shoes? What are the payment structures? How much do session musicians earn? At what point should you be at what sort of income expectation as a session musician, and how does that work? And I think those are the sorts of expectations that actually we would benefit from across our industry as an artist, as a songwriter, as a label, as a publisher. What is the scale you have to get to have a realistic expectation of having a certain level of income over what kind of time period? And at the moment, we're all fishing in the dark. Very few people know the answers to those questions, and they're really important questions. If you're going to jump off a cliff and enter this industry, sorry, Cliff, if you're going to take a leap of faith and give it a go in this industry, that's information that should be available to you.
Okay. Well, I mean, it feels like we feel like we could go on for another couple of hours because there's all this stuff. But the other thing is, it's been a really good constructive discussion. I think the thing, going back to what you said at the start, which is that the important thing now is people's voices are being heard. Artists are getting to talk about this stuff, and artists are engaging with this. Like, I think a few years ago, artists didn't get a say in any deals that were made around this, but also they were just making music and looking at their deals and sometimes complaining. Whereas now I feel like there's so many more who are talking about how they operate and understanding this world and the same. So I think it's been a really good discussion, and I feel like I'm looking forward to this inquiry, because I don't think it's just going to be a big blame fest. I think it's going to be people expressing how this affects them, what it means for their lives, and how we can improve it, and generally finding a way forward. So so thank you both. It's been really kind of good to have you on, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you too.
All.
And I guess we say we've got to get a better sign off, haven't we? A slick sign off. I get to hear, I'm like, we're done. Oh no, I need to say goodbye. But yeah, I mean, if you're listening to this, thank you. And we're going to be telling you about our next show very soon. We sorted that out. But for now, what does it podcasters say? Give us a like. I don't know what you're saying now, because it used to be on iTunes. Give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, but now on Spotify, you can't follow us on Spotify. Give us 5 stars where you can give us 5 stars, and tell all your friends. Thank you very much.